In the cloud, things change all the time. It's pretty much become a way of life. The key is that when things change, they need to be meaningful and help solve fundamental problems or make my life a whole lot easier. But change isn't always easy, and the Windows Virtual Desktop product team understands this. So when working on the star of today's video, they have been very careful to maintain all of the fundamentals that you have grown used to in using WVD, but have also made several innovations that will make management a whole lot easier. So for the next few minutes, we're going to dig into the new Windows Virtual Desktop management interface. I'm Dean Cifola, and this is the Azure Academy. Now let me make one thing clear right off the bat. This is not in any way a new version of Windows Virtual Desktop. I've heard people say that this is WVD version 2. This is not at all the case. Since October, WVD has been in general availability with full support, with SLAs, and none of that is changing. This is a new way that we're going to be managing our WVD environment, and there are a bunch of innovations in here and things to make our lives easier. So the first thing we're going to do is go in the Azure portal to our subscriptions. And inside our subscriptions, we'll scroll down in the center blade to the resource providers. And in the provider list, we'll search for desktop. And you need to verify that Microsoft.Desktop Virtualization has been registered. If not, you can go ahead and click on it. And we'll have a register button here. So go ahead and click that. So while that's going on, let me give you a brief overview of what the new portal offers. So the model that we've been using up until this point is over on the left, and over on the right we have the new ARM-based WVD model. And ARM, for those of you who don't know, stands for the Azure Resource Manager. And so I may also refer to it as the old portal and the new portal, just for ease of conversation. Let's do a comparison here so we can understand what the new model offers. You wanted to deploy WVD in the non-ARM model, so what you had to do was first go out to a website and grant consent from an Azure Active Directory global administrator in order to set up WVD running in your environment. You set some other things in Azure AD, and then you had to do a PowerShell command which gave you a tenant, and it also deployed a tenant group. Underneath that tenant, we had our host pools, and under that we had our app groups and session hosts. And this was pretty much a static tree-based hierarchy. And you could also have multiple tenants and basically have multiple independent trees. The new ARM model is quite different. First of all, we do not need Azure Active Directory Global Administrator consent because this is a first-party service as part of Azure's ARM model natively, and that simply means that this is all part of your subscriptions now. Okay, Azure Active Directory is still something that we depend on, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And for our new WVD resources, the first thing we have is what's called a workspace. And the workspace is going to function kind of like a user persona, and I'll explain more about that in just a second. On the same level as the workspace, we now have a host pool. So this is a change from that hierarchy that we had before, where now these things function more like independent containers. And then we also have in between them the app group, and then we have the session host. Now the session hosts and the app groups are still very closely tied to the host pools themselves. Applications still get installed to the session host and presented through the app groups. Users still log into the session hosts. But being in this new ARM model, we have some added functionality now. First of all, these all are native Azure resources, so all normal Azure rules apply. WVD is now natively part of the AZ PowerShell modules, and other management and diagnostic features through Azure Monitor and Log Analytics are all native now in WVD. Now, as far as the relationship here, as I mentioned, the host pool is tightly connected to the app group and the session host, but it's the app group that's connected to the workspace. Now, the benefit of this is now multiple app groups from multiple host pools can now be presented through a single workspace, making the workspace kind of like a user persona. Now that we have access to the new portal, let's start building. We'll go right to the top to create a host pool. I'll put this in a new resource group so we can keep these separate from other resources. We'll call that new portal. Our host pool will be called new portal-00. And for our location, we have an indicator here that says that metadata will be stored in East US. And that is because we have East US selected as our location. If I change this to West Central US, you can see that changes the tag here. Okay, and more regions will be brought online down the road. Then we have our host pool type. And as you know, that would be a personal or a pooled host pool. If we choose personal, we have the option of doing either a automatic assignment, meaning whichever user logs in first will get assigned to the first VM and so on. Or we can choose a direct assignment where we pre-allocate where Sarah will use VM1 and John will use VM2. Or we can choose a pooled approach, in which case we have to set the maximum number of simultaneous users for a single VM. So I'll just say 10, and then we set our load balancer type, and this is where we choose breadth or depth. And this will depend on your management strategy. In breadth mode, we will have users logging on evenly to all the VMs. So first person goes on VM1, second person on VM2, and etc. In depth mode, we will stack 10 users onto VM1 before anybody logs onto VM2. I'll choose breadth mode in this case, and we'll hit next. And from this new experience, we have the option to create VMs right in the process. So I'll select yes here to build a new VM. Now, by default, we will be building the VMs into the same resource group where we're building the host pool resources, or you can change that to some other resource group. Like I've got one pre-created here for all my new host pool VMs, so I'll just use that. That's also located in the East US. I've set my size for B2MS. I'm going to build 2 new VMs with a prefix of new pool. This will be using the gallery image of Windows 10 multi-session on a standard SSD. And if I scroll down for the rest of it, see what network I'm building it on, which subnet, whether or not I want my VMs to have a public IP address. I'm not going to use a network security group because I already have one attached to my subnet. Then the last few items are related to our domain. In my case, the UPN of the account I'm using to join is the same as my domain name, so the @msazureacademy.com. However, if yours are different, for example, your UPN is @msazureacademy.com, but your actual domain name is msazureacademy.local, then you can specify that here. You can also specify the direct path to an OU in your Active Directory if you don't want your VMs to join in the computer's container. I'm going to set these settings to no because I don't need either of those, and I'll hit next. The next step in the process is to build a workspace. Now, we're not actually going to do it here for a certain reason that would be made clear in a moment, but if you need to, you can either select an existing workspace or you can go and create a new one right here. And again, I'm not going to do this right now, and we'll come back to this in a minute. So we'll hit next, and we can add some appropriate tags. And I've got my cost center as always, so I know who's paying for these resources. The app in this case is the WVD new portal, and my environment is my lab, and I'll hit next. We can review everything on the list and make sure it looks good, and then hit create. All right, now let's walk through what we've just built. And first, check out our new Portal 00 host pool. And the very first thing at the top here, we have our overview section where we can learn about this resource. And that's the resource group, location, subscription, subscription ID, and tags. Then over on the right side, we have which type of host pool this is. In this case, it is pooled. The assignment type, which we'll come back to in a moment. The size of the VMs that are in this host pool and what type of disk it's using. Over on the left in the blade, we're in the overview right now, but we can go to the activity logs. And now we've got standard Azure activity logs. So I could pull up the JSON related to this particular build process that we just went through. We also have access control, and we could view our different role assignments or add new roles. We have our tags that we have already added, and we can modify this any way we like. Then we have the properties, and here's where we have the resource ID of our host pool, the resource group and subscription it's located in, and some of that basic information at the bottom. We also have here the RDP properties. So in the old version of the portal, you had to manage this through PowerShell exclusively. Now we have the option to do this directly from the Azure portal as well as use PowerShell. Okay, and we'll cover more about this a little bit later. We have locks, which are a standard way to secure your resources in Azure. We can export our ARM template from here like we've done many times in the past. And then we have specific things about this host pool, and that comes in 2 different items, and that is application groups and virtual machines, which we will come back to in just a moment. At the bottom, we have monitoring diagnostic settings. You can just hit the add diagnostic settings and give it a name, like WVD logs. Check the particular items that you want to monitor and then where you want to send the data. In my case, I'll just be sending it to my Log Analytics workspace, but select whatever works for you and then I'll hit save. So those things that we just looked at are all common across all the different resource types related to WVD for host pools, app groups, and workspaces. Now let's dig in just a little bit deeper. Let's go over to application groups. And since this is not a hierarchy anymore, these are showing us now the relationships between the app groups, the host pools, and the workspaces. So the host pool that we just created did not have a workspace associated with it, and that's why that's blank over there, and we're going to fix that in just a second. And then the bottom two are associated to the same workspace. So let me click on the existing workspace that I have here. Over here on the left, we've got our application groups, and here's where we can add new app groups to this workspace. So I could just click add at the top. There's our workspace. You could just click on it. Now it's added here at the bottom. Once we hit select, that would then complete the add. Notice that we can also do deletes from here. Okay, so I could delete this remote app group, and I'll just save that. And then if we return to that original view and refresh, so now we just have the one workspace. So let me go back to the main screen of the new portal. We'll go to workspaces now, and I'll create a new workspace. I'll build this in the same resource group that I had already for the new portal. We'll call this the new workspace 02. We'll give it a friendly name and a description. And then we have our location. Now it is critical to understand that when you provision WVD resources, the resources themselves can live in any of the Azure regions with a caveat. A host pool that exists in East US needs also to have a WVD workspace and app groups that also live in the East US. The purpose of this is the geolocation of data that's stored as part of the service. We want all those things to be in the same region. Now, this does not include the virtual machines. They can exist in any region. Okay, this is just about the WVD resources themselves. So we'll click next here, and here's where we can add our app groups to this workspace. So we'll hit yes, and then I'll click to register. And notice that the only one that's here, even though we have two that are available, is the one for our new host pool. That's because the original workspace that I had is already associated to the other host pool. So I'll select here, and then we'll hit next and add some tags, and then we'll hit next. And then we can review our information and hit create. And now we can see our brand new workspace. So if we go back in here and we go to app groups and try to register a new group, see that there is none available. But if we go back to our pre-existing one and we go back to add, we do have one available. And that is, again, because this other application group is already associated with this workspace. Once you assign the first app group to a workspace, all other app groups from that host pool have to be in that same workspace. But a workspace can span multiple host pools. So if I go back here and I take the app group that we already assigned and I just remove it, then I go back to the original workspace and go to add, we can add that in. And now I've got two different host pools represented in this one workspace. Let's dig into this app group just a little bit more. We'll go to the new portal app group, and then we'll go to the assignments. So in the assignments section, you see we've got our Azure Active Directory group here of WVD users. We can go to add. And then, of course, we have the option of adding any user or group that has been synchronized from our Active Directory into Azure AD. So I'll just type in the word remote here, and you can see I've got several different groups that are from my Active Directory that I'm syncing into Azure AD that we can use for applications. I'll take my RDP group here and add that. And now those users have been entitled, but you're not limited to just that. You can also add individual users directly in the same group. If we go back to the overview of the WVD portal, and we go to users now, we have a search box here, and this allows us to do a lookup of any group or user that's getting an assignment in WVD. So I'll search again for remote and bring up that remote RDP group and look at the assignments, and there's the new portal group that we just assigned. And if I look for my Adam Warlock account, which we also just assigned to that app group, you can see he's there as well. From here, you can also see the individual user session information. So whatever systems you're logged on to, you could send them console messages. You could force them to log off or disconnect their sessions from here. And in the future, other innovations will be added as well. Going back to the host pool for just a moment, we'll go to our new portal host pool. So let's go to the session hosts, and you can see we've got our two that we deployed earlier. Now, before we go to log on, let me open the client. And notice a few things. First of all, I've got from one host pool, I've got an app group and a desktop group from the same host pool. Okay, did you catch that? I'm using remote apps and remote desktops from the same host pool. Additionally, over here on the right, I've got the new host pool that's being presented, and then I've got a blank workspace at the bottom. Okay, because remember, we assigned our new host pool app group to our existing workspace. So let's see what happens if we make a change. Back in the workspaces, we'll go into our existing workspace and go to the app groups and remove our new portal group. Back in the client, we'll do a refresh and notice what happens. It removed from our workspace at the top. It did not show at the workspace on the bottom. That's because the WVD application works based on what you have entitled through the app groups and then associated to the workspace. Okay, so since I haven't yet associated the app group to my new workspace, it doesn't show up. Back in the portal, on the app group itself, I do have the user assignment for the particular user that I'm logged in as, which is a member of the WVD users group, but I still can't see it in my feed because it's not associated with a workspace. So let's make that association to workspace 2 now. We'll go and add that in. Back in the application, we'll do a refresh, and there it is. The sequence is you build your host pool, you build your app group, you assign your users and groups to it, but the end user will not see it until you add it to a workspace. And now we can join together app groups and desktops into a single workspace. And you can do this to span multiple host pools. So you might have a workspace for the accounting department and another one for the legal department and another one for IT. And definitely give me some questions down below or suggestions on how you think this should be used. And one last thing that I wanted to cover in this initial video, I want to go to my host pool, go to our new portal host pool, and we want to get back to those session hosts. And now we want to expand our existing host pool. And this can all be done right in the portal now. So at the top here, we'll go to add. And first thing we get met with is an error. I haven't created a new token for VMs to join this host pool. We've got to go back and do that first. So that's here on the overview screen. And we'll just click the registration key at the top. And now we have to generate a new key and we get prompted for a date. I'll just pick the end of May and then hit OK. And then it generates us a token. Okay, and the nice thing is I can also remove the token just as easily. Now I don't need to download it from here or do anything else from this screen. We can now add new hosts. So we'll go back and push add, and then it's going to walk us through a wizard. And some of these things are pre-selected for us because we're building into an existing host pool. We'll hit next for virtual machines. I'll be selecting the same resource group where I built my other VMs. I'll be provisioning 2 more. And we scroll down, we get the network information. Again, I'm not using a network security group because I already have one attached to the subnet, and I've inputted my domain information. We'll hit next and add some tags, and then we'll hit next, and we can verify everything that we're provisioning here looks correct, and then hit create. And our build is complete, and we've scaled up from 2 session hosts to 4 session hosts in this host pool. And if we go under session hosts, we can see there they all are. And now we're going to create a new app group and then share some applications. And we can see that there are 2 sets of application groups, our desktop groups at the top and remote app groups at the bottom. We're going to add a new remote app group. Then we have to pick a resource group, so I could pick any one that I like, and I'll just put it in the new portal resource group. However, the host pool and the location are already set for us. That's because the app group is closely related to the host pool, and they have to live in the same region. Notice also here at the bottom, we cannot select a desktop group because we already have one, and you can have 1 per host pool. So we'll add a remote app. I'll just call it new pool apps, and we'll click next. And here's where we can do the user assignment. So I'll click add, and I'll just add my WVD users here. We'll hit select, then we'll hit next for the applications. So when we do, we've got the same kind of experience here that we had in the old portal. We can choose to do this either by a start menu, which will do a lookup on our VMs, or we can choose the manual approach by selecting file path. And we have to provide all of the required information, but it's much easier to use the start menu. So I'll switch back to that. And then we have a drop-down list of all of the different applications that we can present. So I'll just select from the list here the remote desktop connection. And I don't need any special command line switches, but if you do, you could hit yes here and just add those. So I'll hit save and then select next. Now we need to select our workspace. So we'll hit yes here. And from the dropdown, we'll select the one that we already have associated with this host pool, which is new workspace 2. And then we'll hit next and add the appropriate tags. And with those added, we'll hit next. And then we can review everything here and then hit create. Back in our host pool, we can see at the bottom that we have 2 app groups now. And if we go to look at the app groups, we have 1 desktop and 1 remote app. Okay, and we'll get more into app groups and app group management in another video. But for right now, we'll click on remote apps. And then over on the left here, we can see the applications that are associated with this group. And there's our remote desktop connection. We can also add more apps from here, and we get the same menu that we had before. So I'll just pick a couple others. There you go. Now we've got 4 apps total. Back in our WVD client, you can see at the bottom that those apps have now been updated and presented to our end users. So I hope that you've enjoyed this first look at the new WVD management experience. And of course, we're going to have more videos on user and user management, the new RDP client, PowerShell management, and much more. So any suggestions that you have for future videos, give me them in the comments down below, along with any questions that you have. And if you like this video or learned something new, go ahead and hit that thumbs up and share it with everybody who's using Windows Virtual Desktop. They can start using the new ARM portal as well. And if you'd like to receive an email when our videos come out, which is about once a week, then you can go ahead and click on that notification bell along with the subscribe button in case you're not currently subscribed to the Azure Academy. And if you're looking for something more, over here on the right, we've got our latest video up top, as well as a video that we picked out just for you so that you can keep on learning about Azure. Thanks very much for joining us, and we will see you in the next video. Happy learning.